On this question, we are dividing. Let me rewrite this a little nicer. So it's minus 7 minus I over minus 6 minus 3I. All right, so this is a particularly difficult question. Let me write it up here. When we have square roots or I in the denominator. I don't know if you remember from earlier algebra classes, but when you have a square root in earlier algebra classes that really are a prerequisite for this class, you should have taken, I know not everybody remembers all this stuff or has taken it all, but if you have square roots in the bottom, and adding, subtracting in the denominator. That's what makes this particularly difficult. In fact, let me lay out the whole thing. Let me give two cases. So case A, no adding, subtracting in the denominator. Then you just multiply top and bottom by the root and the I. If you have them both, or if you just have one of them, you just multiply by what you got. Case B, this is our case. You have, let me just write have. We have adding, subtracting in the denominator. That's our case. What do you have to do in that case? Something harder. Adding, subtracting always makes things more difficult. You have to multiply the top and the bottom by the conjugate of the denom. In other words, what's the conjugate? Opposite sign in the middle for the denominator. The conjugate of the denominator. So I got to come up here and I got to look at that denominator and go, okay, what's his conjugate? You multiply by exactly what he is, but you change the sign in the middle. See what and top and bottom, right? Because whatever we do to the top of a fraction, we have no choice but to do the same thing to the bottom so that we don't change the fraction. It's a big fancy 1, isn't it? So we're not changing the fraction when we multiply by a big fancy 1. We're just making it look different. What are we trying to do? Getting rid of the I from the bottom. We don't want I's in the bottom. All right, that's the conjugate. It's the opposite sign in the middle. You take exactly what the denominator has. It had a minus in the middle. We put plus in the middle. Everything else is the same. If that had a plus in the middle, we would be putting minus in the middle. Everything else would be the same. It's called the conjugate. It's what you have to do when you have adding and subtracting in the denominator, along with a root or an I. All right, so now we got to carry that out. That's just the beginning of the work. So now you got to take minus 7. It's got to go to both those. So I'd be really careful. Plus 42 minus 21i. He's done. He went to both. Now the minus I is going to go boom, boom. Be plus 6i minus 3i squared, right? Because minus I, it's a little scribbly there. Minus I times plus 3i is minus 3i squared. Over. Now in the denominator, minus 6 times minus 6 is plus 36. Minus 6 times 3i is minus 18i. And then boom, boom, this will be plus 18i. And the last one, minus times plus, minus 3i times plus 3i is minus 9i squared. Okay, so now do you start to see why we do this? See how these guys perfectly cancel out? Remember, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get rid of the I from the bottom, right? This is all about when you have an I in the denominator, how do you get rid of it? Well, do you see why we use the opposite sign? We had a minus, we used a plus, because then you get a minus and a plus, and they cancel. You must say, well, yeah, but what about that guy? That guy, he's an I squared. Those guys go away on their own, remember? I squared, we replace with negative 1. So let me bring it down here. So this becomes then, on the top, oh, and then this one also. both of those guys we replace with negative 1. So what do we get up here? We get 42 minus 2I plus 6I. I'm going to combine those in a minute. Minus 3 times negative 1. This right here has become negative 1, you see. And then 36, and these guys dropped out, minus 9 times negative 1. See the negative 1 right here? This I squared replaced with negative 1. All right. Now we're getting closer. Now we go 42, and then minus 2I plus 6I, plus 4I, minus 3 times minus 1, plus 3, all over 36 plus 9, because these two negatives multiply to be plus 9. And that is 42 and 3, 45 plus 4I over 45. You can leave it like that. That's actually a fine answer right there. Or if it bugs you and you want to rewrite it, oops, that's the wrong tool. Or you can separate 45 over 45 plus 4 over 45i. You can just put that 45 underneath each of them separately, and then that would be 1 plus 4 over 45i. That's another valid answer. Both those are good and right. Neither is better than the other. On a multiple choice test, make sure you can identify this or this. They're both right and true. They're both the same thing. Okay, so recapping, what did we do on this one? When you have got i's or square roots in the denominator, there's two things can happen. If you have no adding, subtracting, that's the easy kind. Some of our other examples, just multiply top and bottom by the square root in the I, no big deal. But if you have adding, subtracting, that's a bigger deal, right? We had subtracting. So if you have adding or subtracting in the denominator along with an I or a root, you need to use the conjugate, which means you take exactly the denominator, whatever sign it has in the middle, you do the opposite sign, top and bottom. So you grab exactly the denominator, top and bottom, but opposite sign. So if this one had had a plus, then I would have done minus on those two, right? Then you just FOIL out the top and the bottom. Remember, I squareds become negative 1s, and then just work it all out. Look at that. What do we do? No more I in the bottom. See how that got rid of the I from the bottom? Just a number down there now, or this version, same thing. That successfully gets rid of the I from the denominator.